The Va'an Hegemony had endured for millennia, a proud, stoic empire built upon traditions and strategies perfected over countless centuries of galactic dominance. Their military doctrine was a tapestry woven from the triumphs of their ancient heroes, their tactics enshrined in sacred texts, their fleet formations meticulously copied from legendary victories that had shaped the very fabric of known space. They were a civilization that honored its past, not merely for reverence, but for replication. The ancestors were victorious, was their core military tenet. And so shall we be, by following their path. Their starships were not just vessels. They were floating museums of martial heritage, their designs echoing the ships that had conquered the ancient galactic core. Their ground forces moved in formations dictated by a 1,000-year-old battle manual, their strategies executed with flawless, almost ritualistic precision. War, for the Va'an, was a solemn, predictable dance, a reenactment of glories past, where the outcome was foreordained by the wisdom of the ancients. When the Va'an Hegemony first encountered the Terran Federation, their initial reaction was one of disdainful amusement. Humanity was, to their ancient sensibilities, chaotically primitive. Our ships were an eclectic mix of functional designs, our tactics a wild, unpredictable mess of improvisation and brute force. Our history to the Va'an was a fleeting blip, a brief, chaotic flicker in the vast cosmic tapestry, certainly not a source of strategic wisdom. High Strategos Valtor, a Va'an of immense historical knowledge and unbending traditionalism, was tasked with analyzing this new, noisy species. His report to the Hegemony's ruling council was concise, dismissive, and utterly confident. Species, designation, human. Valtor's deep, resonant voice filled the council chamber. They are a species without coherent doctrine, without a respect for established precedent. Their tactics are born of frantic improvisation, their strategies a desperate scramble for advantage. They possess no great martial heritage, no foundational victories from which to draw wisdom. They are, in essence, a blank slate, militarily speaking. The Va'an Council, after a period of serene contemplation, deemed humanity to be a Tier 4, unstructured species. They would be easily incorporated into the Va'an sphere, their chaotic energy channeled into productive, structured endeavors, much like a child learning to walk a predetermined path. The conflict, a war humanity would later call the Historians' War, had begun. The First Contact War was swift and devastating for humanity. The Va'an fleets, moving in formations perfected by ancient heroes, executed maneuvers that had broken empires millennia ago. Their Starhammer formation, an ancient strategy designed to envelop and crush an enemy's flanks, easily outmaneuvered the Terran Federation's hastily assembled battle lines. Their phalanx thrust ground assault, an almost unbreakable formation of heavily armored infantry, pushed through human defenses with inexorable force. Worlds fell, one after another. Humanity fought with desperate courage, but our tactics, improvised and reactive, were no match for the Va'an's perfectly executed, time-tested strategies. Our commanders, trying to counter the Va'an's overwhelming force, found themselves outmaneuvered before they even completed their deployments. On the command bridge of the TDFS Lexicon, a salvaged civilian research vessel converted into a mobile command center, Fleet Admiral Anya Sharma stared grimly at the holographic tactical display. The Va'an were closing in on the Sol system. Their Starhammer formation was splitting, preparing to envelop the last vestiges of the Terran fleet. Dr. Alistair Vance, a lean, intense man with the disheveled hair of an academic, stepped forward. Vance was no career military officer, but a specialist in ancient human history, a scholar of forgotten empires and dusty battlefields. His project, Project Archive, had been largely ignored by the Terran military, seen as an academic curiosity rather than a strategic asset. "Admiral," Vance began, his voice surprisingly calm, "the Va'an are not improvising. They are executing textbook maneuvers. Their star hammer formation, it's a direct copy of the Carthaginian strategy at the Battle of Cannae from Earth's ancient history, a double envelopment designed to cut off retreat and crush a superior force." He paused, a faint, almost predatory smile playing on his lips. "They believe they are replicating perfection. But even perfection has weaknesses, and humanity has a long, bloody history of discovering them." He then displayed a series of holographic projections, ancient maps of Roman legions, tactical diagrams of Napoleonic battles, schematics of World War I trench lines. He showed how these historical conflicts had unfolded, the initial brilliance of the strategies, and then, inevitably, the counters, the adaptations, the desperate, bloody lessons learned through failure. "For millennia," Vance continued, "humanity has waged war, not with elegant doctrine, but with constant, brutal iteration. Every victory, every defeat was meticulously recorded, analyzed, and learned from. We don't just have a history, we have a database of military successes and failures, a living archive of every possible tactical misstep and every desperate counterplay. My proposal," Vance concluded, his eyes blazing with conviction, "is to deploy Project Archive. We cannot outfight the Va'an's ancient wisdom, but we can predict it. We can counter strategies that have been refined for millennia because we have already fought those wars. We have already lost them, and we have already learned how to win them. We will fight. The historian's war." The High Command stared, bewildered. Was Vance suggesting they fight a galactic war by studying ancient Earth battles? It was, to their technologically advanced minds, a profoundly illogical concept. But then again, so was everything else about humanity, and they were desperately, hopelessly outmatched. Project Archive was activated. It was a radical, almost absurd gamble. Its recruits were not soldiers in the conventional sense, but volunteers drawn from every discipline of human historical study. Military historians, archaeologists, sociologists, even dedicated wargamers and reenactors. Their mission: to predict the Va'an's ancient wisdom and expose its hidden flaws. Major Elena Rostova, a grimly practical former combat historian who had spent years sifting through dusty battle logs and archaeological digs, was put in charge of the first Historical Strategy Corps deployment. She understood the weight of the past. The Va'an, in their methodical advance, always began their engagements with their signature star hammer fleet formation. It was considered unbreakable, a perfect double envelopment. On the bridge of the TDFS lexicon, with Va'an fleets converging, Vance and Rostova worked with their team of historians. "They're initiating the third phase of the star hammer," a tactical officer reported, panic rising in his voice. "Their flanking elements are moving to cut off our retreat. We're going to be crushed." Vance, however, remained calm. "No, they're executing the Hannibal variant of Cannae. The flanking elements will accelerate, creating a hollow center, inviting our main force to push through, only to be crushed when the hammers close. It's elegant, but predictable." He pointed to a specific point on the holographic tactical display. In every historical application of this strategy, the flanking elements, in their haste to complete the envelopment, stretch their lines thin. There's a momentary point of structural weakness, a single, critical vulnerability at the pivot point of their turn. If we hit them there with everything we have, we won't break the formation. We'll disrupt the timing. Admiral Sharma, trusting Vance's seemingly absurd historical insight, ordered a desperate counterattack, not a retreat. The Terran fleet, instead of being enveloped, charged directly into the weak point of the Va'an star hammer formation. It was a suicidal gamble, utterly counterintuitive. The Va'an, expecting humanity to either flee or be trapped, were caught off guard. Their perfect formation, designed for a predictable enemy, was suddenly grappling with an enemy that had found the one-minute flaw in a strategy perfected millennia ago. The timing was indeed disrupted. The Starhammer formation, instead of closing perfectly, sputtered, its flanks momentarily stalled. It was not broken, but it was confused. In that moment of confusion, humanity unleashed its full, if crude, firepower. The Va'an, accustomed to ritualistic, predictable engagements, found themselves in a chaotic, messy brawl. Their perfectly drilled units, expecting a clean engagement, were forced to improvise. And the Va'an did not improvise well. The Battle of Sol's Edge was not a decisive victory, but it was not a defeat. Humanity had held the line, and they had done so by fighting a battle that had already been fought and studied 2,000 years ago on a dusty field on ancient Earth. The historian's war had begun in earnest. The success at Sol's Edge, though confusing to the Va'an, was undeniable. Humanity, a species with no coherent doctrine, had somehow countered one of their most sacred, time-tested formations. High Strategos Valtor ordered an analysis of the human chaos. They are not chaotic, Valtor projected to the Hegemony's council, a new note of apprehension in his voice. They are predicting us. They are anticipating our every move. They are finding flaws in strategies that have no flaws. The Va'an, steeped in tradition, had no concept of failure as a learning tool. Their history was a chronicle of unbroken triumphs. Humanity, however, had a meticulously documented history of failure. Every tactical misstep, every flawed doctrine, every hubris-driven defeat had been dissected, analyzed, and learned from. Dr. Vance's project archive, now given unprecedented resources, began to systematically catalog and cross-reference Va'an tactics with historical human conflicts. Their steel talon ground assault, a young historian named Ben Carter pointed out, his eyes gleaming with intellectual excitement, it's fundamentally identical to the Prussian envelopment at Sedan in 1870. Powerful, rapid, but vulnerable to a strong counter-thrust through the center before the encirclement completes. Rostova's historical strategy corps, instead of meeting the Va'an's steel talon with a defensive line, launched an aggressive targeted counterattack directly into the perceived weakness of the formation, just as the French in a different war had fatally failed to do. The Va'an, expecting a predictable defense, were shattered. The Va'an, in a desperate attempt to adapt, tried to create new strategies, to improvise, but improvisation was alien to their culture. Their attempts were clumsy, inefficient, and often simply recycled slightly altered versions of older, already cataloged tactics. Project Archive had, in effect, created a perfect counterintelligence system. The Va'an thought they were being unpredictable, but they were simply repeating variations of mistakes humanity had already made and learned from millennia ago. Humanity also began to employ deception tactics directly inspired by history. They would broadcast false retreat patterns, mimicking the desperate retreats of ancient armies, knowing the Va'an would respond with a textbook pursuit of the broken foe maneuver that human strategists had long ago learned how to counter. They would feign weakness, knowing the Va'an would follow ancient precepts of overwhelming a weaker opponent, exposing their own flanks in the process. The Va'an, designed for ritualistic perfection, found themselves fighting an enemy that knew their playbook better than they did themselves. Their elegant, predictable dance of war was being systematically deconstructed by a species that had simply seen it all before. As the war progressed, the Va'an, for the first time in their existence, began to experience something akin to doubt, then frustration, then a profound existential questioning of their own heritage, their wisdom, their traditions, their sacred strategies. All were being undermined by a species that possessed no such reverence for the past. High Strategos Valtor, his typically serene demeanor replaced by one of profound anxiety, struggled to comprehend. They are anticipating our every move. They are exposing flaws in our most sacred doctrines. Is the wisdom of the ancestors flawed? This question, is the wisdom of the ancestors flawed, was anathema to the Va'an. Their entire society, their very identity, was built on the infallibility of their traditions. The human strategy of constantly learning from failure, of discarding old doctrines for new, was anathema to them. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Project Archive, under Vance's strategic direction, launched its most ambitious counter-doctrine, the Echo Chamber. They began to broadcast intercepted Va'an communications, subtly altered to highlight internal inconsistencies, to sow seeds of doubt about the efficacy of ancient strategies. They were not trying to hack the Va'an, they were trying to hack their history. For the Va'an, whose collective consciousness was built on perfect adherence to tradition, this was an assault on the very fabric of their being. Their unified belief in the past began to fray. Individual Va'an commanders, accustomed to absolute obedience to doctrine, began to question orders, to hesitate, to experience fragmented thoughts of doubt, an anomaly unprecedented in their history. The echo chamber wasn't designed to terrify the Va'an. It was designed to make them understand, on a primal, incomprehensible level, the sheer, unbridled, and often brutal pragmatism of the human relationship with history. It was designed to show them that reverence for the past was a weakness if it blinded you to the lessons of the present. The Va'an retreated. They didn't surrender. They simply pulled back, sealing themselves off from galactic society, their once proud hegemony shaken to its very core. The war ended not with a bang, but with a bewildered, disheartened silence. The Va'an, the ultimate purveyors of ancient wisdom, had encountered a species that was a far greater master of history. They had encountered the historian's war. The aftermath, the galaxy tried to understand what had happened. Humanity, the young, chaotic species, had defeated an ancient, seemingly invincible empire. They had done so not with superior firepower, but with a unique, almost obsessive dedication to learning from their own, often painful, past. Dr. Alistair Vance became a galactic legend, his theories on historical analysis now studied by every major species. Project Archive, though its combat mission was over, continued its research, delving deeper into the bizarre and often terrifying landscape of comparative military history. General Rostova, now an admiral, oversaw the integration of historical analysis into all concordant military doctrines. She ensured that every new strategy was tested, not just in simulations, but against the accumulated failures of millennia of human warfare. The Concordat, while grateful for humanity's victory, remained wary. They had seen the true power of the human capacity for self-criticism and brutal self-assessment, and it was a power that both awed and deeply unnerved them. They had witnessed a species that could not only face down ancient wisdom, but dissect it, critique it, and then turn its own past against its creators. Years passed. The galaxy rebuilt. The threat of the Va'an became a chilling legend, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unbroken tradition. Humanity continued its chaotic, vibrant existence, but the war had left its mark. The members of Project Archive, the Historians' Corps, carried a unique burden. They had delved into the deepest recesses of human conflict and had, in turn, been exposed to the full, unfiltered brutality of both human and alien warfare. They were heroes, but they were also different. They saw the world through a lens that understood the subtle echoes of past conflicts in every present crisis. Ben Carter, the young historian, wrote best-selling analyses of ancient human and Va'an conflicts, demonstrating how the same tactical errors and brilliant counter-moves had played out across millennia. His work became a cornerstone of galactic military academies. Dr. Vance, in his later years, often reflected on the true meaning of the historian's war. It wasn't just about military victory. It was about learning, humanity, a species that had evolved with a potent, if often painful, capacity for self-reflection, had, over millennia, learned to extract wisdom from its own chaos. We had turned our bloody past into a living, evolving database of strategies, a constant source of innovation. When the Va'an unleashed their ancient, perfected strategies, they were not showing humanity anything new. They were simply showing us a performance of a play we had already written, directed, and critically reviewed 1,000 times over. And humanity, in its bizarre, beautiful, and utterly pragmatic way, had simply turned to the Va'an and said, "We know how this ends. We already lost this war, and we learned from it." The galaxy learned a profound lesson. Never underestimate a species that meticulously records its failures. Never underestimate a people who find enlightenment in their own past mistakes. 4. In that strange, paradoxical relationship with history, humanity had forged an unbreakable shield, and an even more terrifying weapon. We were not merely survivors of ancient conflict. We were its masters. We were its chroniclers. And if necessary, we would always be its ultimate students, ever ready to apply its lessons to the wars of tomorrow.